Social Science. I am Sakthivel Murugan, Social Science teacher, History, Unit 7, State and Society in Medieval India. In this part, we are going to learn introduction of this lesson, major political changes, North India, the advent of Islam, the Chola Empire in the south, Vijayanagar and South India after the Cholas, the Mughals, the arrival of the Europeans. Yes, let us start to learn this lesson. Introduction. The medieval period from the 7th century AD till the beginning of the Mughal rule in the 16th century. The Mughal era from the 16th to 18th century is referred to as the early modern period. The political scenario in all parts of India underwent momentous definitive changes which informed the social and economic fabric and development of the country. Major political changes. The expansion of the Chola Empire from the time of Rajaraja I, which eclipsed the Pandyan and Pallava kingdoms, extending north till Orissa. From the 12th century, the beginning of several centuries of Muslim rule in Delhi, extending throughout North India and the spread of Islam to different parts of the country. By the end of the 13th century, the eclipse of the great empire of the Cholas and the consequent rise of many religious kingdoms in South India. This ultimately culminated in the rise of Vijayanagar Empire, which exercised authority over all of South India and came to be considered the bastion of religious rule in South. The consolidation of Muslim rule under the Mughals in the north, beginning in the 1526 AD with the defeat of Ibrahim Lodi by Babur. At its height, the Mughal Empire stretched from Kabul to Gujarat to Bengal, from Kashmir to South India. The coming of the Europeans, beginning with the Portuguese, who arrived on the west coast of India in 1498. Political changes. North India, the advent of Islam. Muslim rule was established in Delhi at the end of the 12th century by Muhammad Ghori. Arab Muslim merchants had been trading in the ports of west coast, especially Kerala, as early as the 9th century. Similarly, Muslim invaders from West Asia had set up sultanates in Gujarat and since the 8th century. The impact of Muslim rule was felt during the reign of Alauddin Khilji, who sent military campaigns to the south. The primary objective was to plunder the wealth rather than to expand his territory. Devagiri, this place was near Aurangabad, was captured by Alauddin Khilji, renamed Tauladabad. It was the second stronghold of his growing kingdom. Alauddin Khilji's slave and commander Malik Kafur was sent on a military expedition further south in the first decade of the 1300 AD. The Tughlaq kings who came after Alauddin also sent their armies to the south. As a result, the generally more isolated southern part of the country came into the orbit of the rulers of the north. Governors were appointed in various provinces in the Deccan region, and a sultanate was even established in Madurai. During the reign of Muhammad bin Tughlaq, there was a result in Tauladabad. Alauddin Bahman Shah set up the Bahmani Sultanate in 1347 AD with his capital in Bidar. The Bahmani kingdom survived for nearly a century and a half, mainly due to the able administration of Muhammad Qawan, a great statesman and loyal minister. After his death, many viceroys declared their independence, and by the end of the 15th century, five sultanates came up in the Deccan: Bijapur, Golconda, Ahmednagar, Berar, and Bidar. Bijapur and Golconda were the largest of these sultanates, and the region endured a pace of considerable economic growth and expansion of trade. The Deccan sultanates were conquered by Aurangzeb in the 1660s AD, and the entire region as far south as Madras became a part of the Mughal Empire. The Chola Empire in the south. The territorial expansion of the Chola Empire began under Rajaraja I. The Pallava kingdom had already been assimilated into the Chola kingdom. The Pandya kingdom remained independent but was subservient to the Cholas. The empire expanded further under Rajendra I, who had successfully taken his armies as far as to the northeast as the river Ganges. He had also sent naval expedition against the Sailendra kingdom of Sri Vijaya, that is in the present Indonesia, Kataram, that is Kedah, and Ceylon. This earned is the title the Chola who had conquered the Kanga and Kadaram. Kangai Kadaram Konda Chola. Ceylon remained a province of the Chola Empire for the few decades. The empire was further consolidated through marriage with the eastern Chalukyas under Rajendra's grandson Kulotunga I and extended up to the border of Orissa. Maritime trade with Southeast Asia and China expanded greatly during the Chola period. The continued interaction with Tamil merchants resulted in the spread of the influence of Indic culture and art into Southeast Asia, as seen in the magnificent temples of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, Vijayanagar, and South India after the Cholas. The Chola Empire began to decline after the middle of the 13th century. The last known Chola emperor was Rajendra III. The empire died out in 1279. Several power centers came up after this in the region. Further, to the south, the Pandya kings again sought to regain the glory they had lost under the Cholas. Many brilliant Pandya kings like Jadavarma Sundarabandyan ruled at the end of the 13th century. Further to the north was the Hoysala kingdom with its capital at Pelur and later Halebeedu. This kingdom extended through much of the present-day state of Karnataka. The Kakatiyas ruled from Warangal, while the Yadavas ruled in Devagiri, and the Devagiri fell to Alauddin Khilji's forces at the end of the 13th century. These states did not exist in peaceful cooperation, and the region was beset by many internal wars. The establishment of the kingdom of Vijayanagar was the most momentous development in the history of South India in the medieval period. The kingdom was established by Harihara and Bukka, two brothers. They were the first rulers of the Sankama dynasty. They founded a few new capital city on the southern banks of Tungapatra, which they named Vijayanagara. Harihara was crowned in 1336. The Sangama dynasty ruled Vijayanagar for nearly 1.5 centuries. This was followed by the Chaluva dynasty, which was in power only for a brief period. The Tuluva dynasty then succeeded as rulers. Krishnadevaraya, the greatest ruler of Vijayanagar, belonged to this family. As the empire expanded, kingdoms to the south, such as Hoysalas and the Tamil region, were also assimilated into Vijayanagar. The rulers of Vijayanagar were most continuously at war with the Pamani Sultanate as well as with the religious-based kingdom of Kondavidu and Orissa. Finally, the combined forces of 5 Deccani Sultanates defeated Vijayanagar in 1565 AD at the Battle of Talikota. The Vijayanagar emperors then shifted their capital further south to Penugonda and eventually to Sandragiri near Tirupati. The empire finally withered away in the middle of the 17th century. The Mughals. The Mughal Empire was founded by Babur in 1526 after the defeated Ibrahim Lodi at Panipat. The first 6 Mughal emperors are referred to as the Great Mughals. Aurangzeb was the last of the Great Mughals. Akbar consolidated the Mughal Empire through conquest and through a policy of conciliation with the religious-based kingdom of Rajasthan. The Mughal Empire, though began to disintegrate after Aurangzeb, continued to exist nominally till 1857, when the British finally ended the virtually non-existent empire. A new power center rose in Maharashtra in the 17th century, and the Marathas, under the leadership of Shivaji, seriously undermined the authority of the Mughals in western India. At its height, the empire stretched over most of the Indian subcontinent. Only the southwestern region of Kerala and southern Tamil Nadu were not directly under Mughal rule. The arrival of the Europeans. During the 15th century, the Europeans were preoccupied with trying to find a direct sea route to India by passing the overland route through West Asia and the Mediterranean. The spice trade from India was controlled by Muslims up to Alexandria. By gaining direct access to India, the Europeans could exercise more direct control over the spice trade and obtain the spices at more favorable prices. In 1498, Vasco da Gama landed on the Kerala coast, having sailed around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa. Barely 5 years later, the Portuguese built their first fort at Cochin in 1503. Goa was captured in 1510 and became center of the Portuguese state in India. Because of their naval superiority, the Portuguese were able to conquer many ports from East Africa up to Malacca and could effectively control the maritime trade over the entire region. Other European nations soon followed the Portuguese, most notably the Dutch, English, and the French. The activities of the latter were carried on through the respective East India companies. While these were all private trading enterprises, they had a strong political agenda. During the 17th century, when Mughal authority was still powerful, the European companies were able to trade in the Mughal Empire, but could not have their own territorial base within the boundaries of the empire. In South India, however, political authority was fragmented and much less cohesive and had their own enclaves over which they exercised complete authority. The Dutch were in Pulicat, the English in Madras, the French in Pondicherry, and the Danes in Tarangampadi. Yes, students, we will continue the same. Yeah, again, welcome to Social Science, Unit 7, State and Society in Medieval India, Part 2. In this part, we are going to learn impact on polity, society. Very particularly, we are going to see about the caste system of the society. First, we are going to learn impact on polity. The Indian history had far-reaching consequences on administrative institutions, society, and the economy across the subcontinent. The Chola period was an enterprising period when trade and economy expanded, accompanied by urbanization. The administrative machinery was reorganized during Chola rule. The basic unit of local administration was the village, followed by the sub-region and district. Tax-free villages granted to Brahmins were known as Brahmadeya. Marketing centers and towns were known as Nagaram. The Ur, Nadu, Brahmadeya, and Nagaram each had its own assembly. They were responsible for the maintenance and management of the water resources and land, the local temples, resolving local issues and disputes, and for collecting taxes due to the government. The Cholas' notable feature was the great increase in the construction of temples. This had two dimensions. New temples were constructed and existing temples became multifunctional social and economic institutions. The construction of great temples also was a reflection of the growing prosperity in the kingdom, since the activity involved great expenditure. The temple was no longer a mere place of worship, but became an important economic entity as an employer, consumer, and landowner. The establishment of Islamic rule in Delhi made a big impact on Indian society. Initially, Islam did not cause any social tension. Arab merchants, for instance, when they came and settled in Kerala coast, married local women and led a peaceful life. The situation changed when Islam became a state power. For a medieval ruler, one way of asserting imperial authority was to demolish the place of worship of the enemies. Otherwise, Islam as a monotheistic religion had its positive impact in Indian society. It played a decisive role in the evolution of composite culture. Muslim kingdoms in Delhi as well in Deccan also attracted migrants from Persia and Arabia who moved to India and took up service in these states, and many became important and well-known statesmen. This also opened up Indian society to steady interaction with West Asia, resulting in the transfer of cultural and technical influences. Muslim merchants and craftsmen also migrated from the north of India to the south in the wake of the military expedition. Society became more heterogeneous and hybrid in character. A new composite culture evolved. This could be seen most vividly in the Deccan sultanates of Bijapur and Golconda, whose rulers were extremely broad-minded and secular in outlook. A notable development was of the profusion of contemporary historical accounts of the Muslim sultanates by Arab and Persian historians. Al-Biruni, Ibn Battuta, the next one, and Ferizda are among the best known of the Muslim historians. These historians provide valuable information about the rulers and events of the medieval period. They also provide an alternate historical point of view of Islamic rule in India, as seen through the eyes of Muslim writers. The establishment of the Vijayanagar Empire changed the administrative and social institutional structure of South India, especially in the Tamil country. Perhaps because the new kingdoms was threatened from the beginning by the hostility of the Pamadi Sultanate in the north. Vijayanagar evolved as a militaristic state. This empire needed two kinds of resources to feed its military establishment: revenue and men. This was achieved through reorganizing the administration of the conquered territory, especially in Tamil region. Military officers known as Nayaks were appointed as chiefs and various localities in Tamil Nadu and received land grants from the emperor. There were also lesser military leaders known as Palayakaros, who essentially supplied the manpower for the army. Many forts were also built which were under Brahmin commander. The Mughal Empire transformed the economy and society of North India. The empire was consolidated under Akbar through his policy of co-opting the Hindu Rajput rulers under the umbrella of Mughal rule. At the height of its power, the Mughal Empire was one of the largest, richest, and most powerful empires in the entire world. In part due to Aurangzeb's reversal to orthodox Islamic principles of governance, which alienated the Rajput rulers and Hindu subjects, the overextended empire began to collapse under its own weight by the beginning of the 18th century. The arrival of the Europeans in India ultimately culminated in the establishment of colonial rule in India under the British. And this is what is considered foremost when discussing the impact of the European presence. There was an explosion in the demand for Indian textiles in the European markets, often referred to as the Indian craze. This led to the significant expansion of textile production in India, which was accompanied by an expansion of the production of commercial crops like cotton and indigo and other dyes. Society cost. Caste is the most distinctive aspect of Indian society. We first need to understand two dimensions of the term caste. First, the fourfold divisions of society as specified in the religious text, referred as Varna. Improving the status of there was a major preoccupation for all caste groups. This is particularly evident after the 14th century when the traditional local assemblies which controlled the resources and social interactions began to weaken. In traditional society, many castes were denied various social rights and privileges. Caste also created a mythical genealogy to establish its origins. This was used to justify the claim for the right to a higher status in the hierarchy. These genealogies are found in many of the manuscripts called the Colin Mackenzie. Religion, diverse institutions with different ideologies came up within the Bhakti movement during the medieval period or were established under different gurus or religious leaders like Vidyaranya. Saivite movements came up like Tamil Saiva Siddhanta and Veera Saivas in Karnataka. In Maharashtra, the Varaga, the traditionally known systems of devotees of Vidobha arose in Maharashtra during the 14th century. Buddhism had faded out in India. Jainism also lost ground in most parts of India during the emergence of Bhakti movement under Sankara and Ramanuja. However, it continued to thrive in parts of Gujarat and Marwar, especially among the trading communities. With regard to Christianity, there were a small number of Christian groups in Kerala claiming their origins to the times of Saint Thomas, the disciple of Jesus. But Christianity took roots when the Portuguese arrived in Kerala and set themselves up in Goa. But Christianity took roots when the Portuguese arrived in Kerala and themselves in Goa. The best known among the Jesuit missionaries was Saint Francis Xavier, who was instrumental in making the fishing community to take the Christianity in Thoothukudi region. Another notable Jesuit was Robert Nobili, a scholar who was based in Madurai. In the north, a new religion, Sikhism, was founded by Guru Nanak, who lived during the 15th and 16th century. Sikhism grew in strength in spite of severe repression by Aurangzeb. Foreign religions also came to India when Jews and Zoroastrians migrated to India. The Parsis, who fled Persia to escape persecution, settled in Gujarat, while the Jews lived in Kerala. Parsi merchants were among the richest and most prominent in the port of Surat and subsequently in Bombay under the British. Yes, students, we will continue the same in the next part. Unit 7, State and Society in Medieval India, Part 3. In this part, we are going to learn culture, literature, art and architecture, economy, agricultural, non-agricultural production, textiles, commerce, urbanization, conclusion. Culture, literature, art and architecture. The Chola period was an era of remarkable cultural activity. These were the centuries when major literary works were written. The best known classical poet, Kamban, wrote Ramayana in Tamil, which was formally presented in the temple at Sri Rangam. Sekilar's Periya Puranam similarly was presented at the temple in Sidambaram. Among the other great works of the period is Kalingathu Parani and Moovarula. The monumental architecture of Cholas is visible in the great temples of Tanjavur, Kangai Konda Cholapuram and Tarasuram, to name only a few. Stone images were sculpted on the temple's walls and pillars. Bronze images of great beauty and artistry were made by the lost wax process. The best known of them is the iconic representation of Shiva as Nadaraja performing the cosmic dance. A distinct Islamic cultural tradition developed in India with the establishment of Muslim rule. The sultans built forts, tombs, mosques, and other monuments in Delhi as well as in South India, which came under this rule. The Mughal period particularly was a brilliant epoch in the cultural history of India. The Mughals were well known for their aesthetic values and were great patrons of the arts. They left behind numerous monuments, in addition to constructing entire cities like Shahjahanabad and Fatehpur Sikri gardens, mosques and forts. Decorative arts, especially jewelry set with precious and semi-precious gems for items personal use, flourished under the patronage of the royal household and urban elites. The art of painting also flourished in the Mughal period, primarily known as Mughal miniatures. They were generally intended as book illustrations or were single works to be kept in albums. A large volume of literature was produced, especially in Persian and also in Urdu, Hindi, and other regional languages. In the performing art like Hindustani, the name of Tansen is well known, indicating the patronage extended to classical music under Akbar. In South India, the Vijayanagar rulers and their military chiefs actively supported temple construction. Many new temples were built by them. Besides these new structures like uh, pavilions and halls with many pillars were added extensively to existing temples with elaborately carved pillars. Art historians point to the distinctive style of the temple sculptures of Vijayanagar period. The intricately carved lofty towers or gopurams at the entrance to temples were added during the Vijayanagar period. The walls of the temples were embellished with paintings. A large volume of religious literature, especially in Sanskrit, was produced under the patronage of the Nayaks and Vijayanagar rulers. Telugu literature flourished under royal support. A new style of Tamil literature called Pradhabam emerged during this period. The great commentaries of the epic Silabadigaram and Tirukural were also written during this period. Economy, agriculture. India was predominantly an agricultural country, and a very large proportion of the population lived in rural areas and depended on agriculture for their livelihood. Both in the north and south, agriculture depended heavily on irrigation. Canals and wells added to the water resources in addition to rainfall and rivers. The biggest network of canals known in India was built in 14th century by Firuz Shah Tughlaq in the Delhi area. Construction of lakes, tanks and reservoirs with sluices to let out the water as well as the use of check dams all increased the availability of water for irrigation. Cultivators were also encouraged to dig wells. Lift irrigation was used to draw the water in the north. The Persian wheel was used for lifting water from wells. In the Tamil region, the Cholas had created a network of canals for irrigation connecting the tributaries of Kaveri. Lakes and tanks also added to the water resources. An important feature of Indian agriculture was the large number of crops that were cultivated. The peasant in India was more knowledgeable about many crops as compared to peasants in most of the world at the time. A variety of food crops like wheat, rice, and millets were grown apart from lentils and oilseeds. Many other commercial crops were also grown, such as sugarcane, cotton, and indigo. Other than the general food crops, South India had a regional specialization in pepper, cinnamon, spices, and coconut. In general, two different crops were also grown in the different seasons, which protected the productivity of the soil. Maize and tobacco were now two new crops which were introduced after the arrival of the Europeans. Many new varieties of fruit or horticultural crops like papaya, pineapple, guava, and cashew nut were also introduced, which came from the West, especially America. Potatoes, chilies, and tomatoes also became an integral part of Indian food. Non-agricultural production. Up to the end of the 17th century, India was one of the largest manufacturing countries in the world, though the economy was primarily agricultural. Non-agricultural production refers to both processed agricultural products and craft production. Primarily, the products can be grouped under processed agricultural products like sugar, oil, textiles, metalwork, precious gems and jewelry, shipbuilding, ornamental wood and leather work, and many other minor products. The organization of production basically depended on the nature of the market for which it was produced. A large part of the production was intended for local use in the village or at most a rural region. These goods were basic utilitarian goods like pots and pans, implements like ploughs, basic woodwork and coarse textiles. Generally, the producers marked the product himself, and exchange was probably conducted on barter system. In economic terms, what was important was specialized production by skilled craftsmen for an external market, especially in demand among the high income rural and urban upper classes. Such craft production was generally located in cities or in rural settlements close to the cities. Craftsmen generally worked on an individual or family basis from their homes or workshops, though larger manufacturing units employing many craftsmen were set up under the Mughal state. Textiles, nearly all the cloth that was produced was of the cotton, though silk weaving had developed in Bengal, where silk was produced, and in Gujarat. Each region of India produced a range of highly specialized local varieties of cotton cloth, ranging from the coarse to the superfine, but all were intended for an external market. Dyed and printed patterned cloth involved the use of vegetables dyes. India had two natural advantages in cotton weaving. The first was the cotton grew in almost all parts of India, so that the basic raw material was easily available. Second, the technology of producing a permanent color on cotton using vegetable dyes was known from very early times in India. Cotton does not absorb dyes without a preparatory process using mordants, which was not known in the rest of the world. Indigo was the most important dye crop that was grown in India, but other dye crops were also grown in India. Dye woods and resins like lac were imported. In addition, the range of colors were produced by using flowers and fruits and products like turmeric in various combinations. Commerce, the large manufacturing sector, especially produced goods for exchange and not for self use. Therefore, the Indian Therefore, India had an extensive network of trade for marketing these goods. The village was the basic geographical unit of production and was essentially a subsistence economy, and barter was the medium of exchange in those days. Big cities were usually major commercial centers with bazaars and shops. They were also intermediate points in inter-regional trade, since they were connected by a network of roads to other centers in other parts of the country. In addition to such overland trade, smaller ships and ports were used in coastal trade along with western and eastern coast of the country. Finally, the major ports were the nodal points in international maritime trade. Maritime trade across the Indian Ocean, extending from China in the east to Africa in the west, had flourished for many centuries. Thus, ports like Malacca, Calicut were entrepôts or intermediate points in this regional segmental trade. In the 17th century, Surat in Gujarat, Masulipatinam in Kolkata Kingdom, Chittagong in Bengal, Pulicat and Nagapattinam on the Coromandel coast, and Calicut in Kerala were all major ports in Asiatic trade. India was also a major exporter of textiles, pepper, precious and semi-precious gems, especially diamonds, which were then found only in India, and iron and steel, which were greatly in demand in the entire Asian region. Textiles accounted for nearly 90% of the total exports from India. The major imports from China and the East were silk, Chinese, ceramics, coal, spices, aromatic woods, and camber. Silk trucks, tie woods, and sugar were the main import from Persia, where gold, ivory, and slaves were brought in from East Africa. Urbanization. Travelers coming to India in the medieval period noted that there were a number of urban centers of various sizes, from cities to small markets, towns throughout India. Though the country was primarily rural, the urban population was probably quite small as a proportion of the total, but it had an economic and cultural significance which was much greater than its actual size. What are the factors which facilitated urbanization? It has been observed that cities and towns fulfilled diverse and overlapping roles in the economy. The large cities were centers of manufacturing and marketing, banking, and financial services. They were usually located at the intersection of an extensive network of roads. In South India, especially the Tamil region, urbanization went hand in hand with the temples. Temples were large economic enterprises requiring a variety of goods and services to function. They needed and employed a large number of people to man to religious services, the kitchens, and for other work. Devotees coming to worship at the temple needed many services and goods, so that temple towns also became marketing centers. Conclusion. The medieval period, covering more than 700 years of Indian history, was a time when momentous changes took place in the political landscape, which also transformed the social and economic fabric of the country. Yes, students, finally we are going to recap this entire lesson. Major political changes commencing from the establishment of Muslim rule in Delhi are we elaborately learn in this unit. The enterprising period of Cholas and the significance of Vijayanagar Empire in the south also we elaborately analyzed. The economy and society during the Sultanate and Mughal rules also we learned. Occupational costs and conflict between right and left hand caste also learned. Progress in art, literature, and music also we learned in this lesson. Finally, we learned about the condition of agriculture, trade, commerce, and urbanization are elaborately we learned in this lesson. Thank you.